been asked to kind of, for some of you that maybe don't know us or what we do, let me just tell you a little bit about Expleo. We kicked off the brand this year. Before that, some of you would have known us as SQS here in Ireland. We've been here for about 20 years, and our main focus in life is helping our clients meet the objectives of their change programs, which are typically underlined by IT and tech, to meet those objectives by bringing quality into the whole equation. And we do that by bringing methodologies, by bringing process, procedures, and people and skills. And for me, today and the next few days is really about skills in IT and how we get to attract more women into the tech world. We today in Expleo, we're about, we'll say 25%, maybe 26%. I want to get it to 30%, I want to get it to 40%, I want to get it to 50%. It would be great that if in a couple of years' time, we've got a decent split of gender. But it's not just about gender. It's all about the various cultural diversities that we now enjoy in our workforce, because it would be stupid of me to say that we can only today resource out of the very small gene pool that's in the tech industry in Ireland, because the demand out there, as we all know, is huge. So getting more women to join us, making our company more attractive is a critical thing. So I'd like to, first of all, introduce our first speaker, Berni Moore.
Tonight is about great expectations. So we had a little bit of a few brainstorming sessions about what can we do to sort of promote women in the workplace and then promote it outside of the workplace as well. So we were coming up with some slogans, we were coming up with some themes, and we caught on to great expectations. So great expectations, as we all know, Dickens, written in 1861. So the main theme of Great Expectations, the book, is the desire for self-improvement and also the need or the possibility for advancement. And we thought, actually, that's really good. As women, we are a minority in the workplace. We have always been a minority in the workplace. So how can we promote self-improvement of women and then promote advancement? So if we look at advancement tonight, Declan is going to talk on the self-improvement side. So a little bit about the individual, realizing your self-worth, how to get to know yourself better. What do you need to do, like realizing your potential, understanding your potential, and what sort of behaviors do you have? What sort of things do you normally avoid? And then also building a roadmap for yourself for success. And then how do you share that success? In your confidence, in how you portray yourself. So Declan will speak about the individual, and then Kate will speak about leadership. So in a leadership role, what's your responsibility? How do you promote people? How do you recognize potential in people? And in women, how do you, I suppose, allow for life getting in the way? With women especially, having changes in life, women have children. How do you allow for that? And how do you always be an active rather than a passive leader? And then we have Mairead, who will speak about how, as an employer, do you attract women? So how do you realize bias? How do you see the potential in people? How do you look at roles that you may not have for women, but when someone comes knocking on your door, or a CV comes in, or a recommendation comes in, how can you see a potential or create a space for that woman who has capability and could offer potential and growth in your organization? So there are three speakers. Declan runs Yellow Maze Consulting. Kate Brady is Chief Admin Officer at IFDS. And Mairead is Head of Market Operations at Facebook. If we look at the World Economic Forum, they indicate at the current rate of change, it will take 2 centuries for women to have parity in the world. So none of us in a lifetime, none of our children's children, will actually have gender parity. So we're hoping you can come away tonight with some lessons to own your own advancement, and then look at the potential for advancement in others.
Really great expectations and realizing your full potential really starts with yourself. And it's really is quite powerful. So to start with is I've broken it down into three key areas. So the first place is knowing yourself better. As I said, I love to talk. The cows almost come home when I start talking. And I love expressing myself. I do strategy. The kind of IT work I'm from is architecture, strategy, visionary, type long-term stuff. That's because that's what energizes me. We all have a brain, which is a good start, and different parts of the brain, left and right, you would have heard of this. Different things energize us and different things de-energize us. So, for example, I like abstract thinking, conceptualizing things. I like uncertainty, ambiguity. Don't ask me to be a project manager. It's not my gig. Wouldn't be bad at it. I could do it, but it wouldn't energize me. So learning a bit about yourself. What type of activities do you really fall back into your own authentic self? So what I did was I started looking into this literature. There's a lot of Eastern philosophy. You would have, it's quite new today. I mean, it's quite common today. Mindfulness, self-reflection. But what I did was I started to, I wanted it to be really tangible. So I ended up coming across this concept of if you apply your mind in the area that you're passionate about, you can work to your best strengths. And if you're aware of what things demotivate you or don't energize you, you can actually address those. So when I say I love what I do, I don't love everything I do every day. Part of my job doesn't exactly excite me, but knowing that those type of activities don't excite me is what helps. So where I start with is, and I'd recommend to you, is what type of things energize you? What type of work, what type of relationships, what type of engagement are you built to do? Everybody has an authentic self. Some people are better at certain things than others. If you capitalize on those, you're starting from a base of strength. Then you start to look at, well, what aspects of my behaviors, of how my brain processes information, do I tend to avoid? I'm awful at procrastinating anything that's data related. I am the worst accountant if I ever was to be one. I don't do data. I don't do that type of detail. Some people love working with data. Data analytics today, data scientists. What would make a great team if I was paired up with someone like that? Because the type of work they would do, I can do it, but it wouldn't energize me. But at the same time, often the type of work I do wouldn't energize them. And that's where you start to work to your strengths as a team. The second thing, like I mentioned about an organization, is have a wee think about what your values are. What's more important to you? And this is really important because if you're not working to your own set of values, then you kind of really are without a moral compass. And you'll end up in places maybe that make you feel quite uncomfortable. And you won't be sure why. Tips on doing this. Find yourself a mentor. It's good for growth. Bernie's standing up. If you're going to choose a mentor, choose one from not your same profession. It helps. Gives you a completely different perspective. Novelty. Go after new things all the time. Because the brain is addicted to novelty. Learning new things. And lastly, ask for feedback. And I'll end with a quote. And I've got to remember it because I'm on stage and I'm trying to remain calm. It is Kristen Hanna. And it says, the purpose of knowing your potential is not to enhance your career or make more money. It's not just that. It's to get back in touch with your authentic self.
I've had the pleasure, I suppose, of working with people almost all of my career. And on a personal front, I am married with two gorgeous girls. And so the topic and being asked to speak in this kind of gender context is very close to my heart, because I do want to make sure that the working environment that they experience, not just, I suppose, in the workplace, but as they go through school and college, and that they feel that they have all the options open to them that they should have, and indeed that anybody should have. So I do want to say, for those of you in the audience that are thinking, maybe either male colleagues or females say, well, surely we already know this, we're already females, we have the personal experience. I think this is something that applies to absolutely everyone in some context. The gender aspect is the most measured, most reported aspect of diversity that exists. It's really important that you don't think it takes 30 years before you have something to offer in this space of developing potential. That's hugely important. You don't realise that effectively for every one of you in the room, no matter what age you are in a position to positively influence somebody else's experience of themselves and their belief in themselves. So I said I have 2 daughters, so I've experienced what it's like to, I suppose, continue to try and develop and grow my career whilst trying to have a family, being pregnant in a working environment, a very active working environment. I worked till my last hour of my last day in both cases. Being out on leave, I took a full 12 months in both cases. Don't regret it for a minute, and I've taken blocks of parental leave since, I should add. But coming back and resuming and trying to resume, a senior role and trying to continue to progress. And what I would say is, as a leader, it's really important, and I said I do mean all of you in that context, not to write people off, whether it's parents that you have to care for, whether you're doing study outside work, you're training to run a marathon or a triathlon, or you've had kids, or you're planning to have a family, whatever the circumstances, and they're not specific to women, but we are, I suppose, faced with that practical, absolute dilemma of if you're somebody who's chosen to have a family, then you can't avoid that pregnancy piece and the time that comes after, and nor should you, by the way. But what I say as a leader, make sure you don't write people off. There will be phases in people's lives where they are making choices, and that's absolutely fine. But again, with the benefit of longer time, you realise that it's lovely to see those people when they do come back, and at some point, and I've had that kind of lovely experience of seeing people, it could be a few years down the road, that you supported at a time when they needed to as I said, maybe do a more of a consolidation period. It's usually after they've kind of had a few kids, for example, in this context. I know there's loads of other examples, but in the context where it's family, they've had a few kids. They've had those mad years when they're toddlers and they pick up every single thing that's going in the creche, and they feel like they've had to be going home and picking them up early and not letting them back in. That goes on for a few years, and then they get them into school and they finish a bit early those first few weeks. But they come in someday and they suddenly have that fire in their eyes again, and they feel like they have some time on their own back again, and they suddenly feel like they have the capacity to create space for themselves to grow. That happens for a lot of people when they still have a good 20, 30 years ahead of them in a career, So the important piece is to kind of give them the time, give them the space. Don't write people off when they're making choices that for a while there's something else they need to do, because they will be back and they're worth waiting for, It's really important that you create an environment in your team where there can be that honesty and that openness and that trust, and they can tell you and they can speak with you about those things. But there's a thing called EX, employee experience, and it's a big thing, it's a coming thing. If you're in that environment, you're probably already talking about it, and it's very much about the importance of the environment you create for your employees and the impact your culture has. So what I would say is you definitely need to create a space that's a safe space that people can be honest and open. But what then are the behaviours that you as a leader in your working context should be doing to create a space where then you can untap or tap into some of that potential? So just going to touch on 4 quick things, and there's nothing here that I would say especially mind-blowing or new, but hopefully it just helps. So the first thing is empower. It's really important if you're building somebody up that you trust them to make decisions. And I would say, one of the things I learned from somebody else early on was the gift, I suppose, of being trusted with decisions. Because a lot of people, and I'd say people with maybe more female characteristics, often doubt themselves and second-guess themselves, So getting the confidence that comes from making a decision and expressing that decision is quite important. So the important thing is that you respect their decision. If they can say to you, I made this decision, and at the time, this is what I considered, and there's a sound rationale, then even if it turns out to be a bad decision, you have to stay with them, have their back, and that comes with the empowerment. Recognition, it's again very, very obvious, but just make sure that you're, as a leader, when people are putting in the effort, that it's the individual themselves that gets the recognition for it. And in a teams, there's nothing probably more divisive than a situation where that isn't what happens. Confidence is hugely important, and what's really important about building confidence is that people don't come along because I think this, for a while, and at some point in my career, I remember kind of trying to understand what kind of a leader I was and what kind of a leader I wanted to be. And I looked around me and I saw people who I thought I wanted to be them, and I got lost for a while, not knowing exactly who I was, because I was trying to be like other people. And what I realized eventually is, no, I need to be like the best version of myself. I need to be true to myself. It's really important to be authentic. So if you are trying to grow and learn about yourself, and if you're trying to establish a leadership style and you're surrounded by leaders in your business, great, take tips and techniques from what they're doing, but don't try and turn yourself into somebody that you're not. Because in all of this, what's in it for the WIFM, what's in it for me? As a leader, obviously you want a high-performing team, you want the best possible outcomes, and the secret to that truly is the right people in the right roles. And I think it's good for the company and it's good for the person if you can kind of try and get the alignment with those skills. But in a work context, it's very, you might be asked as a leader to be a mentor, and make sure, I would say, put yourselves out there, give the pay it forward concept, put yourself out there. I would say as leaders, if somebody in your team wants to progress, then support them to be able to articulate that, to be able to say it quite clearly and not apologise for it. It's probably number one tip as a mentor is to say, stop saying sorry. The very last thing, to very finish then, is inclusive leadership techniques, because I think a lot of what we talked about is people think inclusivity is male, female, or as a race, ethnicity, and colour, but actually there's practices that you can have that make sure that the style of your team is actually inclusive. And it's nothing to do with the makeup of your team, but it's simple things like if you have working mothers or fathers on your team, but you always set the important team meeting once a month at 8 a.m., you are deliberately creating an environment where people either have to cause themselves major disruption or not turn up and give the impression to others or to you that they don't care. So get to know your team and have inclusivity by design. Think about your people who are quieter and like to think things over for 24 hours before they give an opinion. Stop springing important questions on them at the last minute. Don't go to meetings and say, here's the agenda and here's the topic and I want an answer in the next 45 minutes. Make sure you get the materials out 24 hours in advance. Give people the chance to be their best self, because not everybody works the same. So please think that as a leader, it's not just about the makeup of your team, it's about the style of how you run your team.
So I'm just going to pose us with a question right now, which is essentially this. So if we were to imagine hiring and thinking about what we'd say to our boss or to our CFO, I'd like to hire a role, I'd like to hire a headcount, but I don't actually know what I want that headcount to do or what I want that role to be. I don't really know what it's going to be, but I need that now. They think you're absolutely crazy. There's no way you'd get the dollar or the euros to actually back that. But that's really what we want to think about when we think about ourselves and organizations, and as we look at our potential and we look at our people. Are we really hiring now for what we need in the future, and what does that future look like? And part of that, we talk about potential. And, for me, potential is about the possibility almost. We talk about great expectations here this evening, and we're saying the what if. Well, potential very much is that. Is there that capacity potentially to develop somebody into the future, into that something that we don't know now what it is, but we know it's goodness, we know it's a good thing. And that's where, with a lot of organizations, we hear a lot about playing to our strengths, hiring people for their strengths, not their weaknesses, having conversations around strengths and what those strengths are, and investing in those strengths as opposed to what are the areas of development and opportunity we need to continuously focus on. So just to put something else into the mix here, these factors, which I found as sort of common traits around potential and people potential, they touch on things like motivation, curiosity, insight. They're all the things I like to surround myself with my team every day. I like to surround myself with people who are motivated, who are interested in the mission, who are selfless, who really want to be on the journey with us with regard to the challenges that we face every day to truly make that impact. So they're all factors that I personally love to have around me because it gives me positive energy as a leader. And in an organization, one would think that those are the traits that you would like to have in an organization to truly drive that impact that the organization will need. Well, let's look at it a little bit further, and let's explore it in two facets in addition. So one, if I was to say to anyone here representing their organizations, I say, what sort of candidates do you hire? We'd all say, well, I hire the best candidates. That's what I go after. And if I was to look at this from the perspective of how I develop or who my team are, I'd be very proud to say that my team are the brightest minds in the industry, and that I like to retain and grow the brightest minds in the industry. But how do we do that? And part of doing that is to take the me out of it and to be very aware of the bias. Taking bias out of how we hire is a very difficult thing to do, because we all like to hire what's the same. As much as we say we want to be different, and we can push back on our recruitment colleagues and ask for diverse slates of gender balance, but also other facets of diversity as well. Are we really truly getting that true diverse if we go after the same types of channels to source those candidates, using the same pools of contacts, whether it's employee referrals or other? While we always will get strong talent in there, the question that I want to pose this evening is, are we getting true diversity by going back into that same pool all the time? The second piece of this is looking at as well who's interviewing. So again, personally, I like to have my panel of interviewers who I know understand my business and who understand what's important to me. But if I tap into the same pool of candidate hiring interview, or that interview slate, if it's the same people all the time, coming from the same parts of the business all the time, they may arrive at the same decision all of the time and may overlook that true potential of a candidate because of a certain facet that just wasn't caught because of that unconscious bias component. So one thing that I've learned over the last couple of years is an unbiased approach to candidate screening and interview process, which is not talking about the candidates we're screening, not seeing that feedback until all of those loops are completed. And it's almost like a multi-choice online exam where, we're entering in that feedback, but you don't truly see the final result until you actually get through it all. And that closed corridor enables, in my opinion, and has enabled us in my teams over the last couple of years to bring in that different candidate, which is very important, I believe. The other piece is keeping tally. So are we really keeping tally on the number of men that have applied, the number of women that have applied, the number of other diverse facets as well? And I really mean this. We talked earlier about having allies, but we also want to talk about a little bit as well about accessibility. So are we truly opening up our roles to the wider elements of all of the society and making that door available to them to actually come and feel that our organisations are approachable and are actually attainable to them as well? The second component we talked a little bit about was retaining best talent. And I would like to say that most organizations say we retain the best talent. Retain is the big word here. We do want to retain our biggest asset, our most important asset, which is our people. But are they truly the brightest minds in the industry? And are we truly retaining and driving to retain the best of our people as well? And again, this is where the bias comes in. So as similarly to how we go out and we seed and into the pools for and seek into those pools for recruitment the best candidates, as we look at performance management and truly do those talent reviews and calibrations, who's in the room? Who's actually giving the feedback? How unbiased is that feedback? Are you really doing the 360 with those performance elements and bringing in peer feedback as well to really get that view? And then in addition to that, as we calibrate performance and we look at our top performers, how are they comparing across the wider scale? How are they comparing in Dublin versus San Jose versus Sydney? And that is something to be truly, truly held up to, because that bar is an international bar regardless of where we are. But also looking at how our top talent are performing and how we can get them to that top tier, again, is looking at that potential gap and how we can feed it. And then looking at those bottom performers, and instead of taking the view of how do we manage them to a different place, maybe looking at that with a different lens to say how can they truly provide input and value to this particular organization if we look at their strengths and maybe not their weaknesses, and how do we harness those strengths as well. So that's the challenge that I put out there this evening to all organizations, which is to truly say, in all of what we're doing, whether it's in the hiring, whether it's in the selection, and again, whether it's in how we assess our top talent and who we invest in our organizations, how much of a bias is there and how much are we doing to remove and eliminate that bias to truly be making the best decisions around potential and the strengths area of those talents that we have in our teams. But I also think as well, continuing the investment in an inclusive culture that recognizes but also celebrates and encourages diversity. And looking at it not just from a gender balance perspective either. So while we do want to look at the men-women ratios, We also don't want to look at the white men, white women ratio. We want to look at that true diversity of where are people coming from as well, and what does all of that look like. It's something that I've been faced with in my own organisation, leading a global team, asked all the time, as I hire, how am I ensuring, while I have a 50-50 balance on my team, how am I bringing in that international component as well of people who truly understand the people that are on their teams. And then the other thing that I would just talk about a little bit is just to say that change is the new normal, and everything that we do involves change, and having the agility to be able to change is key. So if there was one thing to take away tonight around how do I identify potential, it's, do you have the people in your organization that can move and that are energized with change, that just feed off it, and that are able to bring innovation and new ideas to the table? They're your people that you want to have on your teams and on board for the course that's stretched ahead of us over the next couple of years. You can see here that having women directors, they saw returns have increased of 66% invested capital, 42% of sales, and 53% in equity. That's just a statement on diversity too, and that's what I'd like to take away. It's not about the numbers, it's about ensuring that we're thinking more around difference versus the same, and that's the key to it. The second piece is around really looking at women leaders, and where we could see returns increase here again, about 34% to shareholders and 35% on equity, as a result of just having diversity at the top of the house. And that's not at the board level, that's at the senior management teams. In addition to that, we see advancement. Women are equally likely to be mid-level, but are 3 times less likely than men to be in senior roles. And just touching a little bit on what Kate talked about, it's like, don't give up on them. There's a reason why women are stepping out at a certain point in their careers as well, that they don't feel, whether it's confidence, environmental factors within the organisation, but there is definitely, we're seeing time on time that there is this dropout, and we're seeing a much lower level at the top levels of the organisation, with about 12% at executive level. So women in senior roles, they are underrepresented, and I think that's something again that we need to talk about from the perspective of how, when we look at our 3-year plans and 5-year plans, what we're going to do in organisations to really address that. Turnover does hurt, we talked about it, and a leaky pipeline does hurt innovation. That interruption, that disruption that happens as a result of that, really important that we're mindful of what that means to the bottom line, time on time. But I just like to close on the fact that, as I said earlier, you know, we're in the halls of an organisation this evening, Expleo, of a company who walk the talk. I'm really thankful and grateful for the fact that I worked in organisations who invest in this area, and as a result, and a mum to 2 as well, no more than Kate, I've been given the runway to be able to get to the point where I am in my career. But that hasn't been without people tapping me on the back and saying, you can do it, but secondly, giving something back as well. And it hasn't been all women helping me on my journey, I can tell you that for sure. It's been a wide range, and a family at the back of me as well to help me through it. But we all play a role in helping each other forward in this. But to the most part, we play a bigger role in ensuring that we're creating a diverse, and most importantly, an inclusive environment for all of our teams and all of our people. And, you know, within my Ireland Inc. hat on, we look out here in, you know, the Docklands, and we do have an international cohort of people who come here to work, but also our own people are all over the world working in fantastic organizations and making really true impact. So we can't at home not forget the role that we play in truly driving that diversity. So with that, I'm sure I hand you off and back to Bernie, but just to say, you know, there's no such thing as a free lunch, and with that, or a glass of wine, Phil. So with that, I know everyone's walking away here today with at least one promise to make that impact walking out the door here this evening. Thank you very much for having me.
Probably towards the third and the last third part of my career, coming away with some areas for thinking, my desire for self-improvement. Declan, great thoughts on, and I think Kate said the same. Be the best you can be. Be the best person of yourself. Try and be the best. Some days you can't, but for me anyway, it's putting on that public face. Behind it, there'll be a lot going on. Life does get in the way. But it's trying in the workplace, and I suppose in Expleo, we're at a client-facing side a lot of the time. You have to put on that public face. And then you can assume that public face. So it's just trying to think about the great expectations, your own desire. I hope you come away today with your own desire for self-improvement. and also the belief in the possibility that you can advance yourself, you can advance the women and people around you, and then you can see the potential in others. And I think it was very key what Mairead said about 3 out of 4 of us. We didn't get to where we are today without someone giving us a dig out, giving us a push up. And because of the gender imbalance, it was predominantly men. So you had to show your capability and push yourself a little bit. You know, don't be afraid to find your voice and get that voice out there. So I think there's really great messages that have come out of today that I hope that you can take away. So we'll just take a couple of minutes and we'll prepare ourselves. We'll get a mic out in the room and we'll start taking some questions from yourselves. So start having a think about what are the things you've taken away from today, and then what sort of questions, you know, that you're still thinking, what else could I do? How could I, you know, help others around me? I've got nieces and nephews, you know, how can I help them? You know, one of my nieces said, I live north of Dundalk, so I've sort of gone close to home. And she said, what do you do? And I said, I work in an office. And she said, you like cooking, why don't you just get a job in McDonald's? And I said, well, I probably would get quite bored working in McDonald's. So you always have to think, what do you like doing? What drives you? What gives you the passion? And what makes you get up at 5 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning to get to work, to beat the traffic, to get in? What drives you? You know, you can have mundane days, you can have mundane weeks. You can have things in your life that do stop you in your tracks, and you have to stop, and your career or your work even will have to take second place. But just think about who's around you. 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds are intrigued about having a job in an office, but trying to encourage them that it's an exciting job, it's interesting, it may not be changing lives, and I do say sometimes, maybe it's not a real job, you know, I'm not driving a bus, you know, I'm not packing groceries, but it's making a change, you know, it's making a change in people's lives in the industry I'm working in, and I do absolutely love it, so I have a passion for it. But outside the door is real life. We walk out, our real lives come into play. How can we change ourselves and others in our real lives as well as when we're at work?
Hi, I'm Camilla, nice to meet you. I have a question for Mairead, in the sense of, you know, a lot of times men respect to women get jobs because they can sell themselves better, they can, you know, kind of promote themselves much better than girls that usually are much less, they're much more humble, or, you know, they're less confident, and they kind of tend to be, oh no, I won't apply for this job because I'm not qualified enough. So how do you get to the interview process, but not only that, you know, also when a boss has to give a promotion to someone, less based on how well you sell yourself and more on what actually your value is? Thank you.
That's a great question. And we talk about it a lot. What I would say is go back to the data points from the perspective of the impact that you've already made in your career. So if it's an application for a role, think about, I suppose, from the perspective of that organization, what are those key KPIs or metrics or indicators that they may be looking for with regard to how you're going to impact on their organization. And language sometimes is very important, and the verbs that we use are very, very important when it comes to that differentiator, I would often say, when you talk about your accomplishments. But I would say just being very mindful of your reader, you know, your audience again, and just thinking, what is it that's going to appeal? You don't have to blag, but the facts are the facts. And I think that's a very important factor. The other one is be prepared. Do your homework, I would say, with regard to the organization, the company that you're trying to get into, and really ask yourself, what are those factors that I can bring to this organization? How does their mission align to my mission? With regard to performance, and this is what I touched at the very beginning, I think it's really important to be able to be very clear with regard to impact of what you've done over the course of that cycle. So if you're talking about your year-end review, really taking the time. And so my advice would be start it early and keep a tally. So all the work you do every month, go back and look at it and say, what was the impact that I had? Keep that tally. And then as the year end comes, you've got it already written. And it's easier sometimes to put it in writing than it is to actually have to sell that story. And then as leaders, the other side of it, as I mentioned earlier, is just us really taking the commitment to take the bias out of our decisions and not letting the louder voices get rewarded, and taking that equal pattern with regard to the quieter voices and how they put themselves forward as well. That would be my advice to you with regard to that.
For somebody looking for a mentor, would you have any advice on like what are the attributes you should be looking for when you start that process?
The typical mentor relationship is probably somebody with whom you can I suppose be open and build a relationship. So I would think it's usually somebody more senior, and it's about them sharing their experiences, or maybe you coming along with a particular challenge that you have. I have a particular situation on my team and I don't know how to handle it, if I could describe it to you. It's that type of a role. So you want, I suppose, somebody who will be accessible, I suppose, and will have the time, and with somebody that you can build up that kind of open and trusting relationship. I try and usually encourage people to think of somebody who's going to bring something a little bit different, So maybe think about what it is that you're looking to develop on, and maybe think of somebody who you can see that skill set in.
So one thing we discussed tonight is we talked about the softer approaches to gender balance, but I'm just curious on your opinions to more firmer approaches such as gender quotas and how you can reconcile that in the business.
I'd love us to be in a world where the natural, cream will rise to the top, and we all have the same opportunities, and we're doing all the right things now, and sure, there's no need. Like, that would be great, but it's not the world we're in. And all the studies of the last few years, if you read the McKinsey studies, whatever studies you read on this topic, we are going at a pace where in my children's entire lifetime, we've just discovered we all have daughters in and around between the range of 8 and 13. We each have 2 daughters, and in their working lifetime, they will not experience any type of significant change in what we're experiencing today. And it's just not good enough. So I have totally come around to, if what it takes is active, accelerated steps to shift the dial, maybe getting a few things wrong along the way, but changing the dial significantly, so then we can go back to being in an equilibrium where it works organically. So as of now, I'm all for it, but happy to be persuaded if people have different opinions.
What advice would you give for somebody who has all the capabilities to make those decisions, but isn't quite the person that's trusted yet to make themselves the trusted advisor? How can they let themselves be seen?
I would say, err on the be bold and go and do it if you feel it's the right thing to do. In a client side, it's a little bit more tricky because you're representing their world as well as your own organisation, and that can be a tough one. Sometimes it's about influence, and it's about being able to influence the circle around us to arrive at that next step. And I know as consultants, and I've worked a little bit in consultancy in the past as well, it is about bringing people with you to arrive at the conclusion that you knew was the right conclusion at the beginning, but you had to bring them on the journey to get them there, to let them think it was their idea too.
For females in particular, we have a tendency to go in, work hard, head down, and think people will notice. And I think that kind of is relevant for the question. And I would just encourage you to stop and think, okay, who are the influencers? Who are the people around the table who are making those decisions? First of all, who do they go to? Something that I've used in the last year or two is a thing called PI, where P is the performance piece, but it's only one piece: image and exposure. How are you perceived? Because if you're perceived as a safe pair of hands who'll never take a risk, then you're not going to get the chance to maybe be put onto something different. And then exposure. Do the people who actually are making decisions actually know you exist and what your contribution is? So I would kind of encourage everybody just to think about their fuller picture above and beyond the quality of their work, which in our minds should be what drives people to accept our recommendations and take the decisions that we suggest that they take. And it's often not.
But I think one of the things it comes back to is your values. So if you're there to genuinely do what you believe is best for the client, and if you can propose a solid, reasonable argument that you have to own. So if you doubt it, or if you have anxiety about it, or you don't think you should be brave enough to raise it, well, do as the others said, reach out for some validation. But a lot of the time, you'll find that clients, I used to worry about this an awful lot. You assume that the worst may happen if you suggest something, or not just the worst, but you actually think a lot more about, what ifs, And I can tell you, most organizations today, in fact, all of them, clients are always interested in hearing about how they can possibly improve. And so you owning that is the start of it. I think just tie it back to the reward as well.
What's your best advice for someone who actually live in their own country and then stay in different places?
When you travel, even the smallest of things will challenge part of your belief systems. And I think advice, you have to stay open-minded, of course. A lot of people struggle with adjusting to it. I think the reason for that is because they're clinging to, are they living abroad? Are they temporarily over there and they've just, they will go home? Or is where they are home? A beautiful quote from Rumi is, wherever you are, be full at that place. And I think it's hard. You're in a new city, a new environment. You have to find out what matters to you and then try your best to live as much as you can in that environment. And I think also the change is great. Novelty, the brain loves it. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but that's how I would approach it.
And I'd also say, throw yourself into the culture you're in. So if you're at work, be curious and ask people, what are you doing at the weekend? Where are you going? That sounds really interesting. And sometimes people will feel sorry for you. And sometimes people will say, she can come along. She can be the token Irish person. You'll get her Irish dancing at the end of the night. But yeah, it's put yourself out there, immerse yourself in the culture you're in, and get out of your comfort zone, because it's very easy to stay with what you know.
How would you answer someone who would be quite dismissive of an event like tonight, and even like a movement of women in tech? And this could be men or women, sometimes playfully dismissing it, like, I don't see gender, I just want the best in the job. Or even women who would be quite aggressive and resentful that they got there on their own 2 feet. Why should it be getting more of an issue now, and why should other women get help that they didn't have?
I'm going to be a little bit bold here and say, and this is after having spent many, many years with organisations, but also throughout my career, I did some short stints as well, and there was a reason for that. I stuck with the organisations who truly believed in me and in the mission that I was about. And the ones that didn't, I didn't stay very long. So be brave to align yourself to the cultures of the organisations that align to what's important to you and your value set. I think that's fundamentally really, really important. And then the other factor is, there will always be voices, and there will always be various voices, positive and negative, in everyone's domain and in everyone's circle. We can choose to listen, or we can choose to ignore. If it's a direct leader and you feel it's blocking, or we feel it's blocking career, well then I certainly would encourage using the paths around that, whether it's HR or other paths, to highlight that, because I don't think that's something that progressive organisations really want to have, and I think we own it to call out that bias that's there. But if it's not someone that's directly impacting on your career, then my other advice on this one would be just to move on. It's their opinion. At the end of the day, I do believe in diversity, which is difference, and everyone having a different opinion, and everyone having the right to voice that opinion. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I have to own that opinion either if I don't agree with it.
Absolutely. If you're wondering, that is an experience you'd come across very, very regularly. It's absolutely out there, and it's just don't give up, don't. I hold true to what I believe and value, and I'll keep fighting the good fight as far as I'm concerned. And a little bit, maybe the answer to the question earlier, you look at what's driving those people, what's forming their decision, what ticks their boat, or floats their boat, and if you can get them to come over to the other side of the fence, great, but at a point, maybe you just have to respect that's their view and you won't shift. But I said, don't give up is probably the message I'd have.